Good day, everyone. Our topic is about language and cultural identity. The main question is, what is language and what is culture? So culture is the defining features of a person's identity, contributing to how they see themselves and the groups with which they identify. Culture may be broadly defined as the sum of ways of living built up by a group of human beings, which is transmitted from one generation to another. Always remember that every community, cultural group, or ethnic group has its own values, beliefs, and ways of living. The next one is language. Language is intrinsic to the expression of culture as a means of communicating values, beliefs, and customs. It has an important social function and fosters feelings of group identity and solidarity. It is how culture and its tradition and shared values may be conveyed and preserved. So in layman's term, language is fundamental to cultural identity. Under the language and cultural identity is a language and cultural bias. Cultural bias is a skewed way of viewing or talking about a group that is typically negative. Bias has a way of creeping into our daily language use, often under our awareness. Culturally biased language can refer to one or more cultural identities, including race, gender, age, sexual orientation, and ability, which we will be going to discuss today.
At this juncture, I will explain to you the first example of culturally biased language, which is race. Biased language in racial identity is timely and relevant problem in the community, especially in the Western countries. These biased languages includes expressions that demean or exclude people because of their race. There are terms to avoid language bias in racial identity. Example, referring to a person as urban instead of inner city, because the term urban illustrate cultural biases that equate certain races with cities and poverty. A person of color instead of non-white people, because the term non-white set up whiteness as the norm, which implies that white people are the norm against which all other races should be compared. Biased language also reduces the diversity within certain racial groups. Example, referring to anyone who looks like they are of Asian descent as Chinese, or everyone who looks Latino or Latina as Mexicans. Some people with racial identities other than white, including people who are multicultural, use the label person or people of color to indicate solidarity among groups, but it is likely that they still prefer a more specific label when referring to an individual or referencing a specific racial group.
Gender has been the most controversial issue that almost every human being feels very involved. We are separated by views and opinions, neglecting the fact that we share the same aspirations in life. These are the terms to avoid language bias. For example, we should use server rather than waitress, chair or chairperson rather than chairwoman, camera operator rather than cameraman. Living in a world full of unique differences is sometimes the main reason why language is constantly affecting individuals, how individuals perceive the society, and has labeled the standard high enough close to being impossible. As a diverse set of beings, we should be entitled to be kind and sensitive. This being said that we should discourage differences like gender and embrace uniqueness. In this way, we promote unity in a place of divided community.
Another example of culturally biased language is age. It is the stereotyping and discrimination of individuals based on their age. Language that includes age bias can be directed toward older or younger people. Descriptions of younger people often presume recklessness or inexperience, while those of older people presume frailty or disconnection. However, older people are oftenly discriminated than those younger people. The term elderly generally refers to people over 65, but it has connotations of weakness, which isn't accurate because there are plenty of people over 65 who are stronger and more athletic than people in their 20s and 30s. So even though it's generic, older people doesn't really have negative implications. So instead of using elderly or elders to address people with age, we could use older people to avoid culturally biases and discrimination. While referring to people of the age of 18, which is younger people, as boys and girls, which has a negative connotations to it, we could use man or lady to avoid language and cultural discrimination as well.
Sexual orientation. Sexual orientation is the term preferred to sexual preference. Discussions of sexual and affectional orientation range from everyday conversations to contentious political and personal debates. A person's sexual arousals and attraction to one or both sexes. In the last decades, there has been a lot of research on adolescent sexual orientation, with the most important finding being that sexual orientation should be distinguished from sexual behavior and sexual identity because they are not always congruent. However, they are all important parts of sexual orientation. The negative stereotypes that have been associated with homosexuality, including deviance, mental illness, and criminal behavior, continue to influence our language use. Some of the examples of sexual orientation are gay, lesbian, straight, bisexual, heterosexual, asexual, queer, polysexual, and pansexual, also called multisexual. And also, another example, if you ask a gay man who has been in a committed partnership for 10 years if he is married or single.
Ability. People who have disabilities are often referred to as able-bodied. Just because someone is disabled doesn't mean he or she is handicapped. Like, for example, handicap instead of disabled, calling someone a paraplegic instead of a person with paraplegia. We should always be mindful as to what exact words to use in addressing a person's capabilities, such as descriptions in describing a person's abilities. It may be less meaningful to us, thus we should put in mind that we have our own level of sensitivity. Some people may have greater to process a message or a words than others, and some persuasion also. In situations, being impaired make us unlawful to discriminate against a persons in with the disabilities.